Up+Adam.
Tractor systems are offline.
We are Beyond FM.
Beyond FM.
The future of broadcasting is here.
Up+Adam with Adam Montiel. It's community content from Concentrate. It's Up+Adam with Adam Montiel.
Some say life is where it begins. Straight to the stars is where it ends. Yes, some say life is just where it begins. Straight to the stars is where it ends. Only to start again.
Thank you for being Up+Adam. Happy Hump Day. Smack dab middle of the week. Let's go. My name is Adam Montiel. So what do you get when you mix rock and roll mythology, a band that defied gravity, and a speaker system so massive it literally reshaped live music forever? You get the Grateful Dead's wall of sound, really an architectural and sonic marvel that was as much an audio cathedral as it was a psychedelic spaceship. Author and audio historian Brian Anderson calls it, quote, ambition stacked sky high. It certainly was. His new book called Loud and Clear, he dives headfirst into this towering tale of obsession, innovation, and the relentless pursuit of perfect sound. Now, look, you don't have to be a Deadhead. I certainly am not. An audiophile, or even be able to tell a subwoofer from a sandwich to get pulled into this story and this conversation. Trust me, if you've ever felt goosebumps at a live show or cranked your favorite song just to feel something, you'll be into this. Brian isn't just telling the story, he lived it with he's got an actual piece of the wall of sound in his living room. He's going to join us to talk about legacy, volume, and how the short-lived sonic beast still echoes through our earbuds and stadiums today. That's coming up. It's going to be a cool conversation. When I saw this guy, I didn't know that this would be a conversation for me, and I thoroughly was enjoyed, and I think you'll be too. Before that, some late-breaking stuff. I wanted to wait for the Diddy verdict. That's why we're a little late to publish today. The verdict is in. Diddy has officially been convicted, but not in the way just about everybody expected. In a stunning twist, Diddy was acquitted on the three most serious charges. Unbelievable. Racketeering and the two federal sex trafficking counts. The ones we all thought were slam dunks after those graphic videos and gut-wrenching testimony. I mean, we all saw the footage, at least of the Cassie video, right? The prosecution laid it out, and yet the jury let him walk on those. Instead, he was convicted on the two Mann Act charges, basically transporting individuals across state lines for illegal sexual activity, prostitution, right? Still serious, still federal, and still likely to carry some sort of incarceration time, but nowhere near the hammer folks were bracing for. In fact, even Diddy was bracing for. Yesterday, the jury said they needed help on one. They were kind of stuck on the racketeering charge. They were unsure. The judge said, go back to the drawing board, go get it done. So they're going to be back in court after lunch today to figure out the next step. So sentencing still hanging in the air. But if you ask around, the general vibe is he got off light. He was putting his hands like, thank you, like the thank you emoji and saying thank you, kind of like OJ did. He was thanking the jury. So he was feeling it. He was feeling good. Let's just say a lot of jaws still on the floor. It's one of those moments where you realize just how wild and sometimes how unpredictable the justice system can be, especially when celebrity, power, money, a couple dozen A-list defense attorneys, when all those are involved. We'll keep an eye on it, see what happens after lunch. For now, shifting gears to a local story really quick. There's been some buzz in Grover Beach around a little park with a lot of heart. 4th Street Park, right there by Ramona Garden Park Center. It's been getting a major facelift lately, and that has meant removing some memorial plaques folks had installed there over the years to honor loved ones. Now, before anyone gets too concerned, those plaques, the city says, weren't tossed or forgotten. They're safe and sound. In fact, Grover Beach has over 50 memorial plaques throughout the city, most of them placed through donations made to honor family members, friends, even beloved pets. City officials say they're working on a plan to reinstall those plaques after renovations are done, but here's the catch. They're also reassessing the whole memorial program altogether, basically trying to figure out the best way to honor people moving forward without letting things get too cluttered or inconsistent. But here's the thing, these plaques, they're not just little chunks of metal bolted to a bench. for a lot of folks, that's the spot. That's where dad liked to sit and sip his coffee, or it's where the kid cracked their first smile. I mean, the little marker becomes sacred real estate. So when it suddenly disappears, even if it's just being put in storage, it can feel pretty heavy, like emotional whiplash in a way, like someone's almost exhuming a soul or a spirit that was laid to rest already. I mean, I know that sounds extreme, but imagine if your mom passes away, you donate this bench, then all of a sudden the park goes, yeah, we're taking the bench. It could be a little jarring. Some residents are having some issues with it, understandably. So hopefully the city gets that. I think they do. That's the heavier stuff than just the park decor. Hopefully they handle it with the same care people had when they put those names in there in the first place. We'll see how that in Grover Beach unfolds. All right, before we get into our chat with Brian Anderson, and I'm telling you, I'm looking forward to this conversation. It's going to be fun. Let's talk Pink Drank. Pink Drank. Bring your thirst. Leave your excuses. This summer, we are pouring pink. Pink Drank is back Saturday, July 12th, coming up. Just a couple weeks away. Elks Lodge and Slow, over the 30 of the hottest producers in beer, wine, cider, spirits, craft cocktails, all poolside, all dressed in pink, curated bites, past apps, live DJ. Come on now, it's going to be incredible. This, not your average tasting, I'll tell you that. This is summer served sexy. It all supports the Woods Humane Society, also the Elks National Foundation. I am part of a 3-person committee that plans this event. Lady I Fancy and I, we birthed this event in our brains. And with the help of Nancy, who we had on last week at the Elks, the longtime elected secretary, it's coming to life. It's in its 4th year. So we'd love to see you there. Pink Drank, DRANK, pinkdrank.org. Also, I got to say, much thanks to Hammer, who does the morning show on 95.3 The Beach, had me on in his 7 o'clock hour for a couple segments, a really great conversation. So thank you to Hammer for having me. I was going to say up and hammer. That's stupid. But you know what I mean? Like having me on his morning show. That was super cool of him.
It's Up and Adam with Adam Montiel.
All right, our next guest, part historian, part fanboy, full-on audio adventurer. Brian Anderson is the author of Loud and Clear, Grateful Dead's Wall of Sound, a quest for audio perfection, the first book to ever fully unpack one of the most ambitious sound systems in rock and roll history. Imagine a speaker rig as tall as a school bus is long, over 100 feet wide, and filled with hundreds of speakers, all in pursuit of crystal clear, mind-blowing live sound. Now, whether you are a Deadhead, a sound geek, or just someone who appreciates a good story with big personalities and even bigger dreams, you're going to dig this one. Excited to welcome Brian Anderson. Thanks, man, for being up and Adam.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so you describe this wall of sound as like this living, breathing mega structure, monster with 1,000 screaming eyes. It wasn't just speakers. It was like ambition stacked sky high. When you finally stood in front of a piece of it in your parents' driveway, of all places, what hit you first? The weight of the wood or the weight of the history, I guess?
Yeah, I was kind of flooded with all of it at once, honestly. I got like an immediate appreciation for just the scale of this full thing. Looking at like the size of just the one speaker that I own, and then imagining dozens more of these stacked all together, filled with hundreds of speakers. That alone, I was like, wow, it just gave me such a greater appreciation for just like the physical scale of this sound system. But then I was also simultaneously hit with, the vibes of history, right? Thinking about the tens, hundreds of thousands of people who saw the band perform in this peak era, who received the sound waves that were flowing out of this cabinet, right? Those people, including like my parents, who I was standing with right there in that moment, like it was a real sort of like, woo, 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 that feeling. And, thinking about, the hundreds of venues that they pulled all of this gear into to set up and perform across this country, up in Canada, over to Europe even, right? Like just all of the miles that they clocked with this piece of gear and all of this other stuff that they had with them. The weight of all that really sort of like, it really, really hit me. And then the deeper I dug into it, I just got like an even greater appreciation for what they were up to in this era.
How interesting. In 1974, Brian, the wall wasn't just loud, it was clean. It was crystal,
Yeah.
It bent physics and finances in all kind of one fell swoop. Do you think the wall of sound was like a miracle of its time? And is there a lesson in the wall's short-lived reign about knowing when to stop or never stopping at all?
It's a good question. I think there was a certain aspect of it that was kind of miraculous, that was sort of operating in like the metaphysical domain, that was almost kind of like a little eerie or magical, like certain things that would happen at some of these shows, right? That was sort of, a miracle or just kind of like
supernatural at least.
Supernatural almost, right? Yeah, not to get like too like new agey.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was an element of that for sure. And also though, this story spans the first like grand 10-year era of this band. And over this 10-year era, they were working at this sound system project obsessively, like show by show, day in, day out, and bringing into their fold, like, serious audio engineer types, right? Who would not consider themselves like hippies back in the day, right? Mm-hmm. But they were bringing in like everyone who knew their stuff and could contribute something to this project. And they were very, very deliberate in what they were up to. So I think it was sort of a mix of both. Like there was sort of like a miraculous element of it. But also a lot of it was very thought out. They were doing their homework. They were reading, all of the out of print, like acoustical engineering tomes from like the 1950s, right? Like they really understood this stuff.
It was like, it's like geeks and freaks, like these, it was just these like sound obsessive souls that were looking. It's so cool. You say that the wall's echoes are still in our lives today, from things like AirPods to audiophile culture to Vegas residencies even. I love that. What's one everyday sound or experience that maybe to you, that's the wall still speaking in a way?
For sure. I mean, if you go to any concert, if you go to see Metallica in a giant stadium, right? Yeah. Or you go to see, sort of like a mid-size, like indie band at like a 1,000 capacity, theater or an auditorium. Or you go see, a punk band at like the beer-soaked club down the street, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to see echoes of the wall of sound. Not just the wall of sound, but also just like adjacent sort of sonic firsts that the Dead were clocking on their road to the wall of sound. So that could be everything from the sound booth being situated out in the audience, right?
Yeah.
Before the Dead, sound booths were typically on like one side of the stage, but they had the idea to put the sound booth out in like the so-called sweet spot audience, because that's where like you would perceive, the best sound out there. So it stands to reason that like the sound mixer should be out in a booth in the audience, right? So you're going to see things like that in all of those settings, but you're also going to see curved speakers. And a defining component of the wall of sound, if you look at photos of it, it's this kind of Death Star looking speaker cluster in the center of the rig. And that's the big vocal cluster. And it was filled with hundreds of speakers and tweeters. And it was curved. So it wasn't just a flat surface. And it was curved so that it could sort of like, it could throw or like sweep the sound across an audience.
Yeah.
And the theory and the mathematics behind a curved speaker array existed, but before the Dead came along, no one had ever actually built one and sort of like flown it or like rigged it up in a live setting.
Yeah.
So they were the first to do that. And if you go to any concert today, you're going to see some sort of curved speaker. You're going to see like a mini version of that giant center cluster that the Dead used in their wall of sound.
Yeah.
So, those are just two examples, but there's so many other sort of, lasting impacts of the wall of sound and just sort of the adjacent work that was happening in the Dead scene around this time that I talk about in the book. Even noise canceling headphones, right?
Right.
That the technological underpinnings of AirPods, noise canceling headphones, like assistive hearing devices.
Yeah.
All that was sort of forged or refined through the wall of sound.
Ah, what a trip. Wow. You mentioned your parents, your mom baking cookies backstage or your dad rigging speakers. I mean, this book is part biography. It's like part cultural epic. What's the one thing about your family's relationship to the Dead that made this project not just feel important, but inevitable?
Yeah. Well, it's been around my entire life, right? And my earliest flashes of memory, honestly, my core memories are of seeing the Grateful Dead perform in the late 80s. So for context, I just turned 39. I was not alive when the Wall of Sound was going, right? But saw the Dead perform in the late 80s when my dad was working as part of the Dead's Midwest local crew as a stagehand. So that, imprinted on me from such a young age, just like receiving the Dead sound, right?
Right.
Through a rig that was much different than the Wall of Sound at that point, much more advanced. But I think that was owing to all the work that the Dead did back in the day. So it's something that I've just been fascinated with and captivated by my entire life, hearing my folks tell stories about seeing the band back in the day with this huge sound system was so interesting to me. And then, getting into like elementary and middle and high school, obviously I've been listening to the Dead this entire time, but, getting into like loud band, like punk bands, hardcore bands, metal bands, like harsh noise bands, right?
Yeah.
And getting appreciation for like volume, and then like going back and looking at what the Dead were doing with this like mountain of speakers and just kind of gaining like a whole new appreciation for just like the level of loudness, but also like the clarity that they achieved like, through a distortion-free sound system. It's just always sort of captivated me. But then there is an element that just kind of feels like fate, kind of acquiring a piece of the Wall of Sound.
Yeah.
Like it's just kind of this full circle thing that like, kind of like, my hair kind of stands on end a little bit. Like it just feels like I was starting to get all these signals from the universe that like, I need to do this book. And I had written an initial story about the Wall of Sound when I was an editor at Vice, and that came out in 2015. And I spent maybe like a year and a half working on that story. And at the time at Vice, I was working at the technology vertical within Vice. And I was like, if I tell the story of the Wall of Sound, of course, it's a story about a groundbreaking piece of technology, but I can also kind of like Trojan horse my love for the Grateful Dead into like, the culture.
Yeah.
So that story came out and it got a bunch of attention, and like that felt cool because, as a journalist, like you want people to read your stories. And I realized very quickly though, that I barely got to scratching the surface of like something much bigger, and like, maybe I could write a book on this one day. So kind of filed the idea away, chipped away at it, like kind of over the years. And here we are 10 years later, and the book is unleashed into the world. It's crazy. But yeah, really like acquiring a piece of the sound system really kicked the project.
That's exciting.
Into high gear. Yeah.
The Dead in like you kind of alluded to earlier, like the Dead let their crew control sound. They built mics to cancel feedback, wired rigs with like Navy grade cables. And this wasn't a band. It was like a damn startup, in flares. Do you think The Wall was the tech world's like first true moonshot decades before Silicon Valley even coined that term? And could this have only happened with the Dead?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they were definitely functioning as a kind of, move fast and break things kind of startup, like a tech startup in the Bay Area, right? So like it would only be just a matter of years later where, Silicon Valley would really start like coming into being, right? So I think there is something to be said for, the Dead sort of coming out of that that region of the country and operating like that. But to your question about, could this have really happened with like any other band? Basically, I don't think so. I think, the Dead were unique in the sense that from the very beginning of the band in the mid 60s, they were always about funneling money back into furthering their sound. So like a decent chunk of every Grateful Dead dollar, and into the early 70s when they were really starting to see like commercial success, a big piece of every Dead dollar would go back into the sound. And most any other band at the time wasn't doing that. They were getting private jets. They were, like bawling out. Yeah. But even the musicians were on, just cost of living salaries, to feed the beast, to feed the sound system. But they also had so many techs to pay who were basically on the payroll. So yeah, they were definitely functioning as this sort of like very kind of DIY startup.
Yeah, this lean startup. So interesting.
For sure, yeah.
You describe The Wall as both a sonic cathedral, which I love, and a logistical just shit show. There's beauty. There's real beauty in that contradiction. What part of The Wall's story do people romanticize maybe too much, and at one part do you think they don't romanticize enough?
Yeah, I think a lot of folks romanticize certain dates, and anyone who reads the book will see that like it is full of dates, right? I just finished putting together like a master list of every show that I talk about in the book. And there's over 300 shows that I talk about in the book. But, there's one show in particular in early 1974 that has become recognizable, or, a lot of people see it as sort of like the debut of the Wall of Sound. Or
like a watershed moment, yeah.
Right. This was like the quote unquote first Wall of Sound show. And that was March 24th, 1974 at the Cow Palace outside of San Francisco. And that was a show that was billed as the sound test. And that's a momentous date in the evolution of the sound system, to be sure. But I think a lot of people don't appreciate all of the milestones that were leading into that point. So if you look at, there's a run of shows in late 1973, at the end of November and early December 1973 at the Boston Music Hall, where those were really, I would consider to be like, those were the first Wall of Sound shows. And what I mean by that is that was the first time that they stacked all of their gear behind the band in one unified backline.
Yeah.
And it sort of proved that, like this can work, moving everything behind the band, eliminating the monitor speakers that were at the band's feet, putting everything behind the band, implementing feedback canceling microphones, right? That was a huge moment at the Boston Music Hall in 1973. And there were a couple shows after that, still in 1973, where, all of the pieces of the Wall of Sound were clicking into place. So I think that's one thing, like to your question, that, maybe gets like a little overlooked or people don't necessarily think about, is like, the Wall of Sound didn't just drop out of the sky, fully formed one day in 1974. It was this years long progression that began really at the beginning of the band. And you can see like show by show, as they're going down the road, pieces of it starting to click into place. It was this progression, and that's really something that I tried to illuminate in the book. And the meat of the book is really the first like grand 10-year era of this band from 1965 when they formed through the end of 1974. That's like, I knew I had to cover that whole sweep. This couldn't just be about 1974 with like the Wall of Sound proper, because so much happened building into that had to be sort of plotted out,
Building a wall of sound in the 70s feels like more than engineering. It was almost like this rebellion, like flipping off the rules with like a soldering gun,
Yeah.
It feels also like it was done more out of love than with ego. What does that say about the Dead and that they chose this way to get loud?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I think the Dead knew that the audience was an integral component of the live experience, and the Dead were always a live band, right? Like they would tell you that they were never really geared toward the studio. I think they nailed it with, Working Man's Dead, American Beauty, maybe Wake of the Flood, those studio albums. But they were a live phenomenon. That's when and where the band happened.
Yeah.
And the audience was crucial to that experience. It was sort of a symbiotic relationship between the band and the audience. And it was all about love in the sense that they were on a mission. The band was on a mission to present their sound in a way that, someone who was right up front at the lip of the stage, or someone who was in the furthest, like the worst seat in concert space.
Yeah.
They would all receive the same sound exactly perfect.
Wow.
Because they had all paid the same amount of money to come see this band. So they owed it to everyone to present their sound.
That's so rad.
Just exactly perfect. Yeah.
You kept a piece, Brian, of the wall in your living room. And that's not just memorabilia. I mean, that's spiritual real estate there. What's the vibe of that piece now? Does it hum with energy, memory, or something else entirely? Do you feel like it's watching you the way it watched over all those years?
Yeah, it's definitely got an energy for sure. Dan Healy, who's a very integral character in the story, who is sort of an early sound man for the Dead. We had many great conversations for the book, but at one point he was like, so late at night, does your artifact emanate Grateful Dead music? And I'm like, I kind of like to think it does. It's definitely like, it's a haunted artifact, kind of in a good way. It's got a vibe, again, thinking about all of the miles that this thing clocked and the tens, hundreds of thousands of people who received the sound waves coming out of it, my mind just kind of reels, and I like preserving its integrity as like this road worn kind of busted cabinet. I include a picture of it in the book, and I've had people ask me, people who are like actual audiophiles who know gear way better than I do. They've been like, hey, are you going to refurbish that thing? Like you could get that thing up and running if you wanted. And I'm like, I think I'm cool just with like maintaining its integrity just as this like historical artifact. I kind of like that, like just not messing with it.
Right.
Yeah. It's just kind of like this sacred thing. Yeah.
Well, look, it was built by freaks, not suits. And it was cool how it gave power to the artists, back to the artists, which then gave power back to the people watching the show. Got to check out the book. Links in the show notes. Brian Anderson. Man, this was a fun chat. You are a fun dude. And man, what a cool story. Thanks for sharing it with me, with us. And thanks for being Up and Adam.
Of course, man. Thanks so much for having me, and I'm glad you dug the book.
Some say life's where it begins. Straight to the stars is where it ends. Only to start again.
All right, you want to learn more? Snag your own copy of the book, or maybe follow Brian on Insta. You can do that. All the links in the show notes. All right, you know what I love is when a business doesn't just sell something, in this case clothes, they serve. They serve people. That's why I'm pumped. Singers, big and tall, right now, back in slow. After 50 years in the game, since 1975, they've moved from Santa Barbara to Los Osos Valley Road, right near the Ribla in that same plaza. And these guys don't just size you, they see you. Bruce and Ellen are the heart of it all. Their hospitality, next level. Shopping for a wedding, they'll even tailor what you buy right there in-house. And if you need help, they'll FaceTime you to get it right. I mean, I was FaceTiming these people when their store was in Santa Barbara. That's how incredible their hospitality is. Send them some love. Singers, big and tall. Fit happens here. And let them know you heard them on Up and Adam. All right, this week moving quickly. Thanks to Moonshiner Collective for original music on the show called Start Again. Thanks to Tamber Winery for the Lobro Studios at Tamber. Taste their wines in the village of Arroyo Grande. And thank you to you for rating, reviewing, subscribing to the show wherever you listen to it, sharing it with a friend. It means an absolute ton. So thank you in advance for connecting with us here each day. I'm your host, Adam Montiel. Till tomorrow, enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Hope your week's going great. And thanks for being Up and Adam.
Some say life is where it begins. Straight to the stars is where it ends. Only to start again. Let's start again. We'll start again. Let's start again.